Okay, in this lesson, we're going to talk about organizing your assets, both on the hard drive and also in Premiere. So let's start with setting up on the hard drive. I use an external solid state drive for all my editing. That way I don't clog up my internal hard drive. So if I go in and have a look at this, I've got a folder called video editing. In here, you can see these are two video projects that I'm working on right now. I recently edited the Idaho BDR, and this is a quarantine project that I'm working on. But you can see I've got a master folder here, and in that master folder, it actually has the sort of structure that I normally work in. And if I go into, say, the Idaho BDR, you'll see that structure. So Premiere creates its own folders inside here, and here is the main project file. So that's that's my editing master file. Then I have an output folder, and that's where I store any renders that I do. So when I export my videos, they go here. So that's where my my finished videos end up going, in the output. And then in my media folder, this is where I organize the bulk of my assets. GoPro footage, music, Osmo, sound effects, drone, stills, voiceover, mirrorless X-T4. Okay, so that's kind of the structure that I really recommend that you work in. So if we go back into, let's have a look, the video editing folder, you can see I've actually created a master, and that makes it very quick and easy for me to set up a new structure. So if I just right click on that master folder, I can say duplicate. Okay, and it's made a copy. And if I click on that, I'm going to call this video tutorial day 8. And that's the name of the project that I want to work on. So inside there, it's already created the output folder, it's already got the media folder, and it's got some standard, these are all empty, but it's kind of created my structure for me. So once I've done that, this is where I would plug in my SD cards and import them. Now, so what I'll do is I'm going to pretend that I've got my SD cards in here. I've got some drone footage, which I'm going to put into the Skydio drone folder. And then while that's copying across, I've got some GoPro footage. So I'll select those, and that's all going to go into my GoPro 9 folder. And then I've got some Osmo footage. That's going to go into my, okay, I haven't got an Osmo folder in here. So what I'm going to do is I'll just grab the whole folder, and so I'll grab Osmo. Oops. Grab the Osmo folder, and I'll just put that in. And then here is X-T4. So I use the mirrorless camera, so I'm going to actually drag that folder in there as well. Okay. So there, I've now basically copied all of my assets into my folder. I'm now ready to actually begin with Adobe Premiere, and we're going to work within this folder called Video Tutorial Day 8. So let's launch Premiere. And when I launch Premiere, it's asking me, do I want to open a project that I've already been working on, or do I want to start a new one? So we're going to start a new project. I'm going to give it a name. So I'm going to call this video editing tutorial. And it's now saying where, and this is important, where is the location where we're going to be doing this work? And so if I now browse and have a look at, let's see, I don't want to go to Idaho BDR, but if I go into my video editing folder, there's my master. Here's the new one that I just created, Video Tutorial Day 8. So that's what I highlight, and I choose that folder, and that is now going to be where it creates all of the project files. So I can click OK, and now Premiere is going to launch, and it's going to actually start working within that folder. Okay, again, this is not a tutorial on how to use Premiere. I expect you to have a sort of working knowledge of that. If not, go and do some LinkedIn tutorials first. But I'll just show you, I'll just sort of orient you to a few things on the screen. Across the top here are the different workspaces. So for example, if I'm doing audio editing, I'll go into the audio workspace and it rearranges my screen. If I'm doing color grading, I'll change my screen into the color mode so that it displays my scopes and things like that. When I'm editing, I'm in this mode, But right now, I want to start assembling my assets. So I go into assembly mode. And it basically gives me three things on the screen. So I've got a really nice, large place to see all my assets. I then have a preview monitor where I can see the actual video itself. And then down the bottom here is my timeline, which is where I'll start dropping the assets to edit. Okay, so now we're ready to import our media. And if I just right click and say import, I've got to show Premiere where my media sits. So again, here are the folders I created. We're working in the video tutorial. If I go into the media, now I can actually pick the media folders I want to bring in. So I'm going to choose my GoPro footage. I'm going to choose my Osmo, my XT4, and my drone footage. So if I click import, they're essentially the four different types of cameras that I was using on this shoot. And now you can see it has brought those all in. So here are my GoPro images. There's my handheld Osmo, there's my drone footage, and there's my Fuji mirrorless XT4 footage. Next thing I want to just talk about is labels. Labels are incredibly important and very useful. So if I have a look at this, Premiere has already created this blue colored label for all my GoPro footage, which is great. If I look at my Osmo, now it's tagged that with the same color, and I don't want that to be the same color. So I'm going to choose the folder. I'm going to choose all of the files within that. I'm going to right click. I'm going to come down to label, and I'm going to make those brown. So now they've got a different sort of color for all of those. If I go to my drone, okay, it's made those pink, which is great. So that's a different color. And if I go to my XT4, again, it's left those the same color as my GoPro, which I don't want. It's confusing. So I'm just going to choose the folder, shift click to select all of those, and then right click, label, and I'm going to make those. Green. So now I'll be able to easily differentiate between the types of cameras that I'm using, and that helps a lot in multiple ways when we're doing the editing, and you'll see that later on. So that's how to set labels for your different media types. The next thing I like to do is just get my metadata set correctly. And when we talk about metadata, we're talking about the information that is displayed about the asset. Now, the default settings for this I find pretty useless. I don't care about the media start, media end, or any of that. So I like to actually display useful information that's going to help me pick the right assets and help me make decisions during the editing. So to do that, we're going to just customize that metadata that's displayed. So if you put your cursor on anywhere on the column headings, and if you right click on it, it'll give you the option to enter the metadata display. Now, when you come into here, again, there's a huge array of very confusing content in here. And what you really need to do the first time is go through and turn off and turn on the stuff that's useful for you. And then you want to save it as a preset. So I've actually got my stuff saved as a preset. So I just have to say Brent's metadata, and it's already turned off and on things. And I'll just show you what has been turned, what I'm using. So I like to have the label displayed, which is the color. I like to see the frame rate. I've turned off all the other stuff. I like to see the video info, and the video info is the aspect ratio and frame size. So that tells me, is it 16:9 or that type of thing. That is all in that first bucket. Then under basic, I've turned on the creation date. So I like the date and time that was shot, and that's useful for sorting it so that all my files go in the right order. And then the only other one that I turn on is under EXIF schema. I like to display the GPS longitude and latitude. And I'll explain why in a moment. So if I now say OK, you'll see that it's basically changed all my columns. And, for me, the creation date is probably more important. So I'm sort of showing the most important stuff to the left. The frame rate, the resolution of the image. So is it 4K? Is it 4:3 aspect ratio or not? The creation date. So if you just go off GoPro name, you won't actually get things in the right order, because if you're taking long shots, the way it names it, the second part of your shot appears right down in the bottom if you've sorted it by name. But if you sort it by creation date, you actually get a good order. And then the GPS latitude and GPS longitude, they're quite useful. Sometimes I look at I might click on this one here, and it's like, okay, a road and hills, and I look at it and I think, I can't remember where that was exactly. And it's useful to actually jump into Google Maps and just tap in the latitude and longitude, and it'll actually show me where that shot was taken. So I don't use it very often, but sometimes if I'm just trying to work out, well, where was that shot again, it is quite useful. So that's a little bit about how I set up my metadata to be quite useful for me. Okay, now the next step is actually, before we can start reviewing and sorting our footage out, we need to create a sequence. And a sequence is basically a timeline that's going to be a repository where we're going to be doing our editing. So if I come down to this new, and I say I want a new sequence, again, Premiere will give us a pretty, dizzying or overwhelming set of, hundreds and hundreds of presets that I can look at. And the question is, well, which one do you use? To make it easy, again, I use presets. So I've actually got two, and I just choose one of these two, Brent Normal and Brent Widescreen. And the only difference between these two is the dimensions. So if we have a look at here, Brent's Normal, I edit in 1920 by 1080. So that's, high definition. And then the frame rate is 29.97 frames per second. So I'm editing at 30 frames per second, which matches the frame rate that I'm shooting at. And that's quite important. Now, between the second one, if you just look where it says 1080 here, when I click on the widescreen one, that's now 960. And basically that's giving me a 2:1 sort of panorama. So it's a more cinematic, panoramic type aspect ratio. Now for this, I'm actually going to use the widescreen. So, and I'll give it a name. So let's call this Final Day Widescreen. Now, you'll see here, it's actually created my sequence, okay? I'm going to create one more sequence now, which is not widescreen, so that's going to be normal. So I'm going to say sequence, Brent's Normal, and I'll call this one Master Edit. Okay. So now I've got two sequences here. Again, I like to encourage organization as you go, so I'm going to create a new folder. I'm going to call this sequences. And this is where I'm going to put all my sequences. So I'm going to drag both of those two into my sequences folder. Again, you can see that I'm just starting to keep my, my folders organized neatly. I'd like to show you how all of the assets end up when you're actually, work your way through a project. So this is my Idaho BDR project file, and you can see I've got music, miscellaneous, I've got my GoPro 8 and GoPro 9, my 360 camera, Osmo, others, Skydio, stills, X-T4, sequences, voiceover, sound effects, and a motion graphics template. So if I didn't have some structure here, this would just be a huge mess and I'd never be able to find anything. So that's why it is really important to get into good practices from the beginning. So we've now created these two different sequences, and you can see that both of these sequences are listed here. I've got my widescreen, and I've got my master edit. And I'm going to try and just demonstrate to you the difference between these two sequences. So if I go into my widescreen first, I'm just going to pick, let's go into and just pick say, some drone footage. So let me just let's create a little sequence find a drone sequence. Okay. Let's mark an in point and an out point. Now, if I drag that drone footage down onto here, you'll see it's going to complain. It says this clip does not match the sequence's settings. Do you want me to change the sequence to match the clip settings? And the answer is no. I've chosen those dimensions on the sequence deliberately, so I want to keep the existing settings. Now, when I have a look at that, if I sort of play that now, you'll actually see that I'm not seeing the full clip. I'm actually seeing a zoomed in amount. So I can't see the whole thing. This will become more evident if I just sort of zoom out. Right now, I double click on it. That's the dimensions of my whole drone shot. So if I zoom down, now I'm actually getting, I've got a little bit of slip because I'm using a sort of widescreen sequence, so I can actually adjust that. Let's take that up to say 75%. So I can kind of fine tune, my framing on that. But now if I play that, I'm essentially getting the full image because I've scaled down that 4K image into an HD timeline. Okay. You'll see the benefits of doing this later on. Now, if I go into the master edit and I repeat the same thing, so I bring in the same drone footage into here, it'll complain again. I keep the existing settings, and again, if I zoom out, click on that. Yeah. So if I zoom out, I click on that, it's the same deal. You can see that it's I have to sort of zoom on it, but now you can see with this one, the dimensions are exactly the same. Okay, so I don't have that extra little bit of overhang that I had on this one because I'm editing in a widescreen format here. So the master edit is 16:9, and that's actually a 2:1 aspect ratio. Okay. What's quite powerful though is I can take one sequence, so I can take this widescreen and I can bring the whole sequence into another one. So that's sort of called nesting. So now if I just if I have a look at that and I play that, so here is my my drone shot, and then you'll see it'll flip. Now here is that nested sequence, and you can see it's put the black bars at the top and bottom because it's not wide enough. And so this is sort of how you get that sort of what they call, postbox effect. And if you actually look at my Idaho BDR video, days 1 to 7, I actually edited like this. So it's full 16:9. But on the final day, because I wanted to make this more cinematic, I actually edited like that. So this will become clearer to you as we start using sequences more, but we're going to be editing in this widescreen sequence, which is 1920 by 960. Okay, now the final step of organizing footage, I actually create proxy files, and I'm going to do a whole chapter on proxy files, but basically it's pretty quick and easy. I select my assets, I right click, I go proxy, and I say create proxy, and then I just choose one of my two settings, which is either 16:9 or 4:3. So these are 16:9. So I'm going to say okay. What that's doing now is that's actually going to take those four clips, and it's going to send them off to the Adobe Media Encoder, and essentially what it's doing is it's going to make smaller versions of those files. And because I've shot in 4K, these are pretty big, chunky, meaty files, and you'll see now it's actually going to start dropping in. It's automatically going to drop in those proxy files one by one. Here it comes. And it's now going to essentially make smaller, lower resolution versions of those images. And it'll just do this in the background or by itself. So down the bottom here, you can see it's actually doing that coding. And you'll see when I get into the editing, by using proxy files, it doesn't change anything. I work exactly the same way. The only difference is my computer's going to run like lightning. If you try to edit 4K files, it's actually, your computer will bog down a lot because it's trying to open a work with huge amounts of data. So when I work with proxies, I'm working with much smaller files. They're about a quarter of the size, and it means I can edit very, very fast. But when it comes to actually producing the final output, it'll swap the proxies back to the original files, and I get the full 4K resolution. Okay, so what I would do now is I would actually come through here and I would choose my Osmo files, and I just say proxy, and I just say create proxies. Again, these are 16 by 9, so I say okay, and off they go. And then now it's actually just sort of creating those jobs. So what it's doing now is it's actually adding those Osmo files to the end of the queue where it's processing the Skydios. Okay, that's done. And now I'll just add in my GoPro. So I'll select the first one, shift click to get all of them selected, right click, proxy, create proxies. Again, I've got this preset set up, and I'm going to talk to you about how I created that preset in a separate chapter. Okay, and that's it. It's now going to add all of my GoPro footage to the end of the queue. And if I now go and have a look at Adobe Media Encoder, where it's doing all of that transcoding, you can see it's just now, I scroll up, let's continue, it's adding all of the GoPro stuff in right now, but basically this is the queue that it's processing, and I can see here the file that it's working on right now, and it's just going to tick through. Now this will take some time. It might take, depending on how many files you've got, it could take 5 minutes, 10 minutes, half an hour, or even an hour, but I'll guarantee you. So I just go away, have breakfast, get a coffee, do whatever I need to do, and I let it do all of the encoding. And then the payback for this is when you're editing, your system will just run like a rocket. So that's the end of the first lesson, which is all around organizing your files for editing. And in the next lesson, I'm going to be talking about how to actually review those files and start pulling out the good shots and doing a sort of rough assembly.